ready, set, go.
Is this thing on, Kanan?
I can never get enough volume, Phil.
Tonight we got Brian Wells. Brian, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How's everybody doing over your way and down your way? Because I guess we're south and west of me, yeah?
Yes, we're a little bit spread out all over the place here.
Yeah.
Where are you at,
from
Brian?
beautiful upstate New York. And the reason why I always say it that way is because people, whenever I say New York, people think New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, trash.
Beautiful upstate New York.
And beautiful, yeah, the good part.
The good part.
The beautiful part. Yeah.
Listen, we've already vowed that one day we're going to take like a road trip out east and like head up through there and like go up to Maine and stuff.
Yeah,
So we'll just head that way, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stop in. I'll give you the dime tour.
All right.
Yes,
Sounds good.
that sounds amazing.
I'll stay in contact on that. That'd be awesome.
Brian, I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. It took us, well, I like to say us, when actually it was me that took so long in getting this put together, which is normally the way it works.
Confession is good for the soul.
It is. I think you reached out to me, it's been a while back now, and you commenced to tell me a very interesting story. For people that don't know, we're talking to the guy that this was the Babylon Bee before anybody ever thought of the Babylon Bee.
Ooh.
So, yeah, this guy was right on top of it. Brian, tell us, what was it called now?
It was called the IHC report.
IHC
And
report.
it was absolutely glorious for about 6 weeks.
Very short-lived.
But it has lived on in infamy for over 20 years, and had an absolute blast doing it. Almost got fired. Almost got my wife kicked out of God's Bible school.
Oh my gosh.
It was absolutely a glorious, glorious time, and that website proved to be very, very prophetic. So I'm very excited to share with you all how it came to be, and also I'm going to reveal on this episode some things that some people have guessed at and guessed very wrong. But I'm gonna reveal. I checked with my co-writer yesterday, and I'm going to reveal for the first time publicly who was my cohort. So,
Heck yeah.
Oh,
we
boy.
breaking news tonight, y'all.
Here
You
we
hear
go.
that? Yeah, we breaking some news.
This is cutting edge breaking news 20 years later.
That's okay.
So you said you started this like, you said 20 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, it was actually in 2001. So I had already graduated from GBS, and my wife was finishing up her final year at GBS. And at the time, I had started a job. Well, I'd been working for an internet service provider providing technical support. And back in those days, and this is kind of hard to remember, but the late 90s is when it was kind of like the wild, wild west of everybody, getting online. There were internet service providers popping up all over the place. And so the company that I was working for hired me probably about 6 months too early. They were offering they were going to offer internet services. They hired me to provide technical support. And in 6 months, I answered 3 phone calls, and 2 of them were wrong numbers. So that meant I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I spent a lot of time reading the Drudge Report.
Uh-huh.
And I spent a lot of time reading The Onion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided I wanted to teach myself HTML. And so one day I was reading the Drudge Report, and it was just before IHC. And for those maybe who aren't familiar with IHC, but that's the Inner Church Holiness Convention. Yeah, I think it's what it's called.
CHM Holy Week is what we like to call it.
Exactly. The Bunhead invasion of Dayton, Ohio is what it used to be.
Oh man.
The Bunhead invasion.
But now
Oh,
it's the
my
Bunhead
gosh.
invasion of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. So,
Yes. They've invaded the South.
Oh.
yes, they have. But so anyhow, I was one day reading the Drudge Report, and I'm not going to say I'm ADHD. I've never been diagnosed officially as that, but I'm also somebody where if somebody says like the word green, then I think grass, and then it's like I got to mow my lawn, and it's like it's all of a sudden it's just on down the line, all of these really weird connections that happen in my head. And I was reading the Drudge Report one day, and just all of the headlines to me were such that it was like, boy, if you just twisted that just a little bit, like just a little way, maybe change the word here or change the word there, that would describe the conservative holiness movement. And so what I did is I ripped off the Drudge Report. I made a copy of it, created a logo. I think it was, I don't even know, it was really bad. But it looked like the Drudge Report logo. It just said IHC report. And I made up a bunch of headlines, and then I just sent it anonymously out to, I don't remember, it was like a couple of people. And then the next thing I know, it's like it went just all over the place. And I sent it, like I said, I sent it anonymously to people. So they're trying to figure out who's behind this IHC report thing. And I called myself the IHC guru.
I feel like Jim Plank he wants that title now.
Well, he can gladly have it. But I didn't write any articles to those headlines. It was just, there was never any grand scheme or plan or whatever. It was just like, ha, 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 send it out. And it went viral before viral was even a thing. And as viral as like something can be in an anti-technology movement. But it was like, all of a sudden it was everywhere. And so then I'm like, well, maybe I'm onto something here. So I reached out to a buddy of mine, whose name I'm going to reveal right now. His name was Dan Neal. He is originally he was from the Indiana area. I think Indiana, like the Westland thing. But anyhow, he and I had gone to college together. At this point, I think he had graduated and moved on.
So your name, you said Dan Neal?
Yeah, Dan Neal. Okay. And he's since left the CHM. But anyhow, so he and I started writing articles. And I want to be very, very clear in writing these articles. We never, ever used any kind of crass language. We never used any kind of like, there was no swear words. There was no, we never questioned anybody's integrity or even anybody's spirituality. It was just good old clean fun and poking fun at the idiosyncrasies of the conservative holiness movement. So to give you some ideas of some of the articles that I wrote, and that he wrote, I wrote one article that was about a waitress at a restaurant in Dayton, Ohio, who was dreading the invasion of the bunheads because she knew she was going to get stiffed.
Yes, that's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
And in the article, it was kind of like she had reached like 43 cents in tips for that week, which was actually up from her average. But then she had a bunch of Chick tracks, one that was covered in mustard stains, and that she had spent 15 minutes in her break in the bathroom looking at her elbows trying to figure out how they look like breasts.
Incredible.
This is great.
Phenomenal.
That's crazy.
Oh Lord, this is fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, dude.
So it was that kind of stuff. Now, to be honest with you, every article that we wrote, as is any good satire, there's a nugget of truth in it.
Mm-hmm.
And where that actually started was when I was at GBS. I worked for a while at La Rosa's Pizzeria, delivering pizzas. And there was one day when I was in the restaurant, and I think maybe me and one other guy, we were like the only Christians that worked there. And this waitress, she was a single mom. She comes back, and she had one of those tracks that look like a dollar bill or a $10 bill or whatever it is. Yeah. And she said, I won't give the exact quote.
Oh, you can. Give us the exact quote.
How in the world, I'll put it that way, how in the world am I supposed to pay my bills with this? And as a Christian, that like hit me hard, because I'm like, what kind of a witness is this? Now, the people that left that track, I'm not saying they were conservative holiness people. They were just really bad Christians. And one of the things that I learned in the tipping industry, I worked both at La Rosa's and I also worked as a valet at a hotel. And that was that if I pulled into a driveway and somebody had a WAKW radio sticker on their window, which WAKW was the Christian radio station in Cincinnati area, I could almost guarantee you I was going to get stiffed. I mean, it just was such a reputation that Christians had for being demanding and for being cheap.
That's sad.
Wow.
When I was at the hotel,
so
it was the same way. When they would have a Christian convention that would come in, those people would have you running all the time and never ever leave a tip. So it was kind of that, taking the whole holiness standards thing and compacting it all together into that article. But every article that we wrote was based on something like that.
Sure.
There was another one that I wrote where it was, and this was taking March Madness, because it was right around March. So, March Madness, not that I would know anything about March Madness.
You weren't supposed to, Brian.
Brackets or anything like that.
And I'm still not sure of it to some point. Is it sports?
Yes, basketball.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, that's all I know. I don't know nothing.
That's why Brian should have known about it while he was
And gambling, sports and gambling.
Oh, yes.
I don't know anything about that.
No, me either.
But anyhow, so I wrote an article about a Sunday school class, and I think it was Sister Bertha who had bet on who was going to get them running that year at IHC. Who was going to get them running the aisles. And so they had come up with brackets, and it was like, I had come up with odds as far as like, AWC was going to get, it was like AWC was 2-1 odds.
That's awesome.
Like GBS was maybe 4-1 odds. And like the liberal Bible colleges were like 750 to 1, because nobody's going to run the aisles for some liberal like Hope Sound or something. No way. AWC, they're going to get them. GBS might get them. After that, Penview, they're probably right up.
Yeah, they get it. But Hope Sound ain't got a shot. They ain't got a snowball chance. That ain't happening.
Not a prayer. And there was also one at the time. I think they were out of it was a Kansas City Bible College.
Yes.
I don't even know.
I think that's.
And they were like 1,500 to 1 to get anybody running the aisle. So,
they didn't get anywhere. They had no chance.
They had no chance.
They don't even get a mention these days.
Where that came from is the previous year, as I was walking out of IHC, there was a couple ahead of me, and they were talking about how they had been running the aisles. And I think it was AWC that had gotten them, running around like El Diablo was chasing them. And the lady says, "You know what? I bet Garen Wolf is jealous that this year it was AWC that got him running the aisles." And I'm thinking, as if Garen Wolf has got a little notebook saying, "Well, that song didn't work. We're gonna have to leave that one out."
I'm just picturing these schools, the choir director giving them like a pep talk, like a coach at halftime. We have got to go on the offensive.
We need more key changes.
These numbers have got to come up.
Video. Oh my God.
My buddy Dan, he wrote under the name Captain America, and
I love it already.
I was watching it yesterday.
What, Captain America?
Yes, you saw me.
So he wrote under the name Captain America. Well, he wrote an article about a quartet. It was very similar in nature, but this quartet was up there singing. And I can't remember which Bible college it was that was represented, but it doesn't matter. They were up there and they just felt it was like really dead and nobody was running the aisles. But then they hit that key change and the tenor just popped out on that high C. And when he did that, they just started running around like the devil was after him himself. And then like the way he closed it, it was like Starship meant Jefferson Airplane, man.
Oh, that is so true. That's the way that works. I can remember that.
Oh, yes.
And I think the title of that article was "There's Money in the Key Change" or something like that. Because anytime you've ever been to an event like that, it's like it might be dead, but boy, when they hit that key change,
Oh yes,
and they repeat that chorus, they're off to the races.
Yep.
They are off to the races.
That key change, that's where it's at, man. Got to pull it off slick. Boy. You can get them. You can a new high score on that one.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so like, I have a question.
All right.
Do you have these copies?
Unfortunately, I do not. I wish I did, and yet on the other hand, I'm kind of glad I didn't. So I used GeoCities to make this website because it was free and it was easy and whatever. And in 2009, GeoCities went out of business, shut down. And so the only thing you can find, if you go to, I think it's oocities.com/IHC report, you can find the hyperlinks to the original articles. So that kind of gives you an idea as far as some of the articles that we wrote. Okay. But the actual articles themselves they're lost to posterity.
Well, I feel that I speak for the nation when I say that this is just as bad as the Library of Alexandria burning down, Brian. What do you mean? This being lost, this is a great tragedy.
That is.
Wow.
Oh, God.
Wow.
So we really did as much as we could. We really tried to stay away from using real people's names, except when you really needed to use somebody's name to maybe make a point. So there was one article that we wrote where I think people were gambling on the number of cans of hairspray that Kim Collinsworth needed to use. Because, if you've ever seen her play the piano, it's just violent. To one point, I think it was at IHC, she actually broke a nail, and actually there was blood all over the keyboard.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I was a little kid when that happened.
Yeah. So obviously, in order to pull that joke off, you have to use their names. It's not like you can use somebody else. You know?
Oh my gosh.
100%.
There was another article that we wrote, and I believe it was Dan that wrote this one, where Nike had determined that this 3-day event or whatever it is of athletic prowess by people in the conservative holiness movement, as they're running the aisles and jumping pews and all that kind of stuff, they felt like people were being underserved by running in dress shoes. And so they had come up with this new wingtip running shoe that would make people be able to clear an altar in a single bound. And
oh my goodness.
Oh, that's great. This is great. Just do it,
Well, that's where we went with it. So we actually were like, so what they did is they contacted Mike Avery to be their spokesperson, because the tagline was, "I want to be like Mike."
I love it.
I want to be like Mike. Holy cow.
This is awesome.
So it was stuff like that where, again, you can't pull that joke off if you don't have, a Mike Avery.
You got to use the name.
In that way.
Yeah, you got to use the name.
And I'm trying to remember, there's a whole bunch of other ones that we wrote that were, it was all very much in that same vein. And again, it was just poking, fun at the idiosyncrasies of the holiness movement.
Yeah.
And there never really was any kind of a plan on our part to, change the holiness movement or anything like that. In fact, at the time, I certainly wasn't, I don't think I was planning on leaving the CHM, although in hindsight, my journey out of the CHM had already started. And I think Dan was already headed that direction out. But for us, it really wasn't an axe to grind or anything like that. We were just having fun. We thought it was funny.
You guys were just writing comedy, essentially.
Yeah. That's really what it was.
Yeah.
Great comedy.
But and then along the way, before I get to kind of the grand finale, what was kind of the downfall of the IHC report, along the way, I started getting all kinds of, fan mail and hate mail. And I'll tell you, some of the emails that I got, I'm not going to say they were vile, but they were hateful. These people that, are thinking that they had the backs of the conservative holiness movement and just hateful, almost to the point like you're going to burn in hell. You know, like that kind of level of vitriol.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh my gosh.
but I started having fun with it because I'm just like, you want to do that. I'd post it right up on the website with their names. You coming at me?
I love it.
I'll put it right back out there. And and then I would just put a response to it.
Good.
And then
You bitter
if people
person.
were yeah, exactly. And then if people were happy with the comment, I would be like, I'd put it up there, the content. Hey, thanks so much. Those people, generally speaking, I don't think I use their names. I tried to protect them because, I saw what I was getting. And then I'm trying to remember the total sequence of events. I had reached out to a cousin of mine, my cousin who since passed away, John Case Jr. He was somebody who actually was blamed for the IHC report.
Really?
My brother Keith was also blamed for the IHC report, and neither one of them ever had anything to do with it. Although John, I had actually lined up to start writing articles. He was going to start writing articles, and then I got found out, and we kind of just quit the whole thing. But
so how did these guys feel about getting accused for something that you were doing?
Oh, they thought it was hysterical. they thought it was hysterical.
What did your wife think about it?
Well, I don't. At the time, I think she kind of thought it was funny, but she was so busy wrapping up. She was almost in finals and wrapping up her senior year of college that I don't think it really registered too much with her what was going on. It was just like, oh, that's Brian being Brian, and it's like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
He's just doing his thing.
Exactly. And but eventually, and actually, she wasn't even aware of some of the stuff that happened. That I shared with her. I think it was in the last year. Some of the fallout that she was not even aware of, because I didn't want her getting bitter and whatnot.
Yeah, I understand
over
that.
some of that stuff. So
yeah.
But anyhow, well, I don't know about good husband, but every once in a while,
shielded though.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I get something right, and I feel like I did that one right. But as they say, a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
Yes, every once in a while.
That's right.
Yeah, not very often. So we, again, we wrote. I can't remember how many articles there were, but the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was the article. Oh, hold on. I got one more great story, and then we'll go to that. Because this one actually just came up, and this is where I'm talking about the IHC report being prophetic. So my brother-in-law is Al Wayman, and you'll see him in I think he's in both the Culture Breakers and in the Hillbilly.
Yeah, I've seen Al floating around. Yeah.
And so he, a couple of, I think it was maybe last week, was talking about how we could use ChatGPT to generate conservative holiness sermons.
Yes.
I saw that.
Yes.
And well, we actually back in 2001 had an article where because the churches were running out of parishioners, the conservative holiness movement was running out of parishioners, they had adopted the Acme 2000, which would the head of the deacons or the head of the board, depending on what mood he was in, could come in and he could program that to, come up with a great sermon from Marshall Smart or, H.E. Shmuel. If you really wanted a hellfire and damnation sermon, he could really crank it up. If you wanted something on standards, he could punch that in.
It's going to be the name of my band, by the way, Hellfire and Damnation. I like that.
So, that was prophetic way back in 2001. We already had beat Al to the punch, and we had beat ChatGPT to all of that. Another article that I wrote actually was one that was called 18 was the perfect number. And again, poking fun at church, the sizes of the churches. And they had tried running 20 one time, but they felt like that was too big. So they down to 18. And then they looked around and they saw that they were related to everybody. And they thought maybe that might be part of the problem, but 18 was the perfect number.
Well, didn't Jim Plank just say something about blue bloods and keeping it all, And within the
He was talking about
holiness
his
movement.
dynasty or not dynasty. That's not what he would call it. Heritage. Is that what they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
keep it
Heritage.
all
Yeah.
together and stuff like that. Well, but for long, you're marrying into your own family. It's
Well, this is West Virginia, so I don't see an issue with that.
oh, don't even go there. You're not even. Speaking of, and you can take this out, Phil. Are you talking about Alfred Wayman? He does the pottery stuff.
Yep, that's my
Okay.
boy.
Okay,
That's my brother-in-law. He is the coolest, one of the coolest guys you will ever meet. He's an agnostic, but he has got the biggest heart,
yes.
the most Christian agnostic person that you'll ever meet. He's more Christian than most Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you story after story about how Al, I mean, that dude would literally give his shirt off his back to help people go out of his way. I love that. I love that guy. I tell you, I can't speak highly enough of that guy. I'm going to tear up. I'm going to tear up. I got to move on.
I get it.
No,
I get it.
He is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful guy. And you can leave that in if you want, or you can take it out. I don't care how you do it.
Yeah.
But he is a great guy. And there are a lot, I mean, honestly, there are a lot of Christians that can learn a lot from Al Wayman.
Absolutely.
That there is no doubt.
Yeah. Where was we at here? What was I lost my place.
Anyhow, so on to the grand finale, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes.
So Captain America, my buddy Dan Neal, wrote this. I mean, this is probably the article, if there's any article that it was an absolute tragedy and travesty that it was lost forever, it was this article. And it was entitled, Jim Plank is the Victory Trio in Drag.
Oh, no.
I love it already.
The whole thrust of the article was that somebody saw the Victory Trio go into the bathroom, and then they saw Jim Plank come out. and then you'd never seen the Victory Trio and Jim Plank in the same room at the same time. And so it was simply Jim Plank had to be the Victory Trio in drag. Yeah. Now, the whole point of that article was not that he's a cross-dresser. It never was. Anybody that would think that we meant that literally is absurd. They just don't have two brain cells to put together.
Right.
The point was, at that particular point in time, he hadn't ascended to the pinnacle of the conservative holiness movement, but everybody saw he was the heir apparent. He was the one headed in that direction.
He was on the upswing.
And it was supposed to be, he was going to be the one that was going to revolutionize the conservative holiness movement. And he was going to bring it into the next century, and he was going to do great things. And our point was simply, he's nothing more than a repackaged Victory Trio. It's just more of the same. It's the same bad ideas, the same bad theology, just in a younger guy.
Right.
And
we're continuing the legacy. What are you talking about?
True.
And I would say that article, all joking aside, was prophetic. It was 100% on point. He is nothing more than a retread of the, whether it's the Victory Trio, you go on down the line.
Yes.
But it was just simply the more of the same. And he certainly, well, he did ascend to the throne. We also refer to the toilet as the throne too, so be careful what you wish for.
Right.
Anyhow, so that one really got some people's boxers in a bunch. And,
so he was looked at that time. How long did this go on? So when you write the Jim Plank article, we're looking at roughly what year?
This was all 2001, and this literally took place in a span of 6 or 8 weeks.
Oh,
It really was. It was just before IHC, leading up. I think it might have been just past IHC. I don't remember exactly the dates and whatnot, but it was just a very, very short time frame where this thing like kind of blew up. It went across the holiness movement as much as something like, early days of the internet and an anti-technology group. But it certainly did, and I had people, touch not the Lord's anointed, all that,
yes.
typical dribble.
Gosh, I'm so sick of hearing that.
Yeah, we hear that one a lot too.
Yeah, you and me both.
So he's on the upswing at this time, and he's looked at as the golden boy. He will be
he's going to be the next H.E. Shmuel. You know, he's going to be the next one to take over the conservative holiness movement. And and so that really was the whole point of that article, was just simply saying, you guys are putting all your eggs in the basket of these young guys, but these young guys are really just young versions of the same old crap that's been around for many decades. And so his and I'm naming names here because I don't really care.
Yeah, give us names. John Baker will love you. John Baker loves names.
Let's go.
His brother John at the time worked at GBS. And I think he was a graphic designer for the God's Revivalist. And he took issue with the insinuation that his dad or his brother might be the Victory Trio in drag.
Oh my goodness.
So they actually put on they did it well, and I walked right into it. But they put on a sting to figure out who was the IHC guru, because again, at this point, this is totally anonymous. It's the IHC guru. It's Captain America, and it was going to be Lato was going to be the name that my cousin wrote under, which is actually, if you read that backwards, it's Utal, Otal, which means the great one in Portuguese. So there was kind of like little Easter eggs that I had put into all of this stuff. But anyhow, so they put on this thing and they tracked my IP address. And because I never figured, number one, I guess I didn't give enough people in the conservative holiness movement credit to be technologically savvy enough to do anything like that.
You mean there's smart people in the CHM?
Not messy.
Very hard.
No, especially at that time period.
Right.
I mean,
That's what I was going to say, especially in that year.
20 years ago, I mean, I was a whole
Yeah,
7 years old.
the internet was getting preached hard
you're
against in
making me feel old.
2001.
So he sent an email that said, here's our, we disagree with everything that you said. Here's a link to our response. Well, dummy me clicked on the link, and that link basically led them right to me. It was actually, I was at work. They called my work. They found out who I was.
These guys went whole hog.
Wow.
Oh yeah. And so the next
Mother
thing
Russia would be proud.
yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So the next thing I know, I'm getting called over to Mike Avery's to have a conversation about this IHC report.
Oh no.
And
he was president of GBS, correct?
He was president of GBS at the time. And again, keep in mind, my wife is a senior, hasn't yet graduated. So he calls me over to sit down and have a conversation, and lets me know that he knows who I am, which he already knew who I was because he and I had some disagreements, shall we say, along the way. But so he let me know that there were many within the conservative holiness movement that didn't appreciate what I had done, what we were saying. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to say that he came right out and said that my wife wouldn't be allowed to graduate from GBS. But I left his house that day with the with the assumption that her graduation from GBS might hinge on whether or not I continued the IHC report.
Oh. The power of assumption, yeah.
Which is something that I had never told my wife until within this last year is really when I told her that had happened.
And all this
but
over,
at that point,
over comedy, essentially jokes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And clean comedy.
Yeah.
The only thing that you might say was a little off color was, the waitress looking at her elbow, trying to figure out how it looked like breast. Well, I mean, come on, that's what we were all told growing up, was that kind of foolishness. And then to say that maybe Jim Plank was a cross-dresser, but again, that was
It's a joke.
Anybody that would
it's a joke.
Anybody that would take that for anything serious is an utter moron, in my opinion. And I don't know what you do with that.
Well, in the
I really don't.
CHM, they do not have a sense of humor. They really don't.
No.
I mean,
No.
I've found this
Not
out.
unless you're telling black jokes.
Unfortunately,
Ooh.
you're onto something, Cannon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, they cannot stand poking fun and stuff like. I mean, I feel like that they would fall to pieces hanging around the Sparks family for an afternoon.
Oh.
It's just they
Just
can't
even
take it.
for an hour, they'd be offended.
Yeah, I mean, if they could hear the jokes that we told
Mm-hmm.
a few days after my dad died, because that's how we process things.
Yes.
You know, we weren't trying to disrespect Dad.
No.
We didn't hate Dad. It's just you cry a little bit,
It's a coping
then you
mechanism.
start cracking an outrageous
really
joke, and everybody starts laughing, and that's just the way we do things.
Yeah.
But that's the way my family is too, and especially my mom's side of the family, the Case family. When I can't remember if it was my grandmother or grandfather passed away, and this would have been when I was like 3 years old. But I've heard the story and the family lore. Whichever one passed away, they're making the arrangements and whatnot. And somebody said, "Well, what kind of flowers do you want for the funeral?" And my Uncle Dave said, "Well, there's stink pots in season." And people are like, they just thought that was horrible that he would joke, but we're the same way. Like, we were going to make a joke about it because that's how we process it.
Yes. Yep. We do the same thing.
Yep.
So anyhow, when I left there, though, already in the back of my mind was why move forward with it? Because a big part of the fun of doing that was that it was anonymous and that nobody knew who it was.
Yes.
Now, all of a sudden, when you start making jokes and you start cracking jokes, people take it as a personal attack, even more so than you doing it anonymously. And so at that point, I was kind of like, do we go forward with it? Do we not go forward with it? And so I think I released a manifesto. I called it the manifesto. And it was just
We're going he's going all killdozer all the way here.
You know it, man. I was hardcore libertarian before I knew I was hardcore libertarian.
Yes, you were.
But I and it was just kind of outlining that this was always a joke. It was never meant to be, a personal attack on anybody. We're not trying to change anybody, change this, change that. It's just jokes, man. It's just jokes. Lighten up, have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another key piece to this whole story is that at this point, my wife and I had been hired to go to the Cayman Islands to work in the school, and I was going to be the youth pastor in the church and so on and so forth. Well, someone in the conservative holiness movement, I don't know for sure, so I'm not going to name names. I have a really great suspicion as to who it was, but I'm going to be careful here. They contacted my uncle, who was actually the pastor in the Cayman Islands, and said, "Do you know this website that your nephew has been writing?" My uncle's like, "No, what are you talking about?" "Well, you better check it out." "So what do you mean?" "Well, if you move forward with hiring him and his wife, we will be greatly disappointed in you, and you will lose favor within the IHC movement."
Oh my gosh.
So my uncle's thinking, "Oh my goodness, what in the world has my nephew been up to?" So he goes and he pulls it up. And I think at the time they only had one computer in the Cayman Islands. I mean, at the school there, they had internet access. It was dial up, way back in the day, the good old days. And so he pulls up this website and then he starts reading it. And he's like, people are upset over this. So he goes and gets my Aunt Celia, who's his sister, was the principal of the school. So he goes and gets her. Now, my Aunt Celia is one of those people that she doesn't talk bad about anybody. She's one of those kind of people that she could walk by a dead dog on the side of the road and find something good to say about it.
No.
"Oh, what a nice set of teeth on that dog." You know what I'm saying? Like
The exact opposite of Canaan is what you're telling me.
But that's the kind of person that she is. And she sat down and she thought it was hysterical. And so if my Aunt Celia, of all people, thought it was hysterical, then I sleep well at night. I mean, not that I would really care. I love Aunt Celia to death, but not that I would. But the fact that she thought it was hysterical, it's like, I don't have anything to worry about. If I can stand before Aunt Celia, I can stand before God.
Oh man.
But yeah, so over that website, they tried to get us fired before we were ever really fully hired. And it just really goes to show, again, the nature of the holiness movement.
Yes.
They can be very, very vindictive. They can be very, very harsh, because in their minds, they think they are doing right by you by being that way.
I've heard of this kind of thing time and time again. I mean, whenever you started hearing cancel culture talked about in the news, it's like, you guys are just now finding out about this? We lived with this all our life.
Yeah, this is normal behavior.
Yeah. They don't like you. I mean, I've even heard of a situation where a guy was told by a CHM preacher, I will not give you a good reference just to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just remember, there'll be a day when those people have to face the good Lord.
Yep.
And they'll get what's coming to them.
They'll get what's coming.
But the sad thing is that there are people who carry the hurt and the scars of that.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And there are people that are far from God as a result of that level of and that to me is what's very sad.
Absolutely.
They have to be held accountable for that stuff. These people have to be held accountable for for basically leading these people away from Christ because of their selfish, stupid actions.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The CHM they do not tolerate any. They have to have groupthink.
Mm-hmm.
They want you in lockstep.
Yep.
And they just will not tolerate
free thinkers.
Yeah. You disagree, and I'm generalizing here, I'm sure, because somebody will probably send me a message, well, so-and-so, whatever. But they want everybody to think alike. They don't want questions asked. Mm-hmm. And if you step out of line, they'll try to squash you like they tried to do to Brian here.
Well, they love it so much so that the Bible Missionary Church has a manual that says, okay, you're going to follow this because this is how we do it. We want all our people to be thinking the same way and like doing the same things and dressing the same way and doing all the, like they always have to be under this whole umbrella, which I'm sorry, rain still falls on people. I can't get around the whole mentality that we all have to agree and be the same thought. It feels like we're Mike Jones, Jim Jones down in Guyana. We're all like just drinking the Kool-Aid, and we need to stop and be thinking for ourselves for once. Because if we're not careful, we're going to be falling for this stuff like, with Jim Plank saying all the stuff he did.
Yeah, his recent fiasco.
If we're not grounded in what we believe and know for ourselves what the Bible says, people are falling for this. And I'm so sorry for the young people that are sitting underneath his leadership, because it's ridiculous.
When you go on to say, like he recently said in a sermon, that anybody who dares disagree is now backslidden, far from God.
Yes.
Yep.
How dare you?
Right.
Who elevated him to the great white throne? And to sit in judgment of anybody as to how they are, in their relationship with God.
Absolutely.
How dare he?
Yep. The stuff that they in general, and he specifically gets away with saying, it's outrageous. It's flat out outrageous. And, essentially with the tactics that they pulled with you, they turned themselves into a miniature dictatorship.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's kind of funny because they all, I guess you could say, they're very right-wing in their political views.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to what they put into practice, like I said, it's Mother Russia all the way, man. It's we will tolerate no dissent, or we will squash you.
It is.
Brian, you said it was your uncle, right, that was alerted to this?
Yeah.
And he was fine with it. So where did it go from there?
Well, my uncle, after he read it and after my Aunt Celia read it, and they thought it was hysterical, they were just like, whatever. And, we went to the Cayman Islands and served for 6 years. But at that point, like I said, we just dropped it. And I don't know if I don't even know if it would have continued, to be frank. It's one of those things that, it was kind of the right time, the right season of my life. From that point on, we moved to the Cayman Islands. I was busy, busier than a one-legged man in a butt kicking contest. It's, and it's one of those typical ministry positions where, you're one tiny salary, and not that I'm complaining. They treated us well, but it was one tiny salary. I thought I was going to be the youth pastor. No, I was a high school teacher. I was the youth pastor. I was a bus driver. You know, it was like you do all the things.
You do.
But it was fine. It was, 6 years that we really enjoyed, and really that also served as kind of a bridge for Bonnie and I think make our final exit out of the CHM. So it certainly was. It was a good time for us, I think, but I just don't think that the IHC report. Who knows what would have happened? I guess I've had people almost every year. I should say almost every year, because over the last several years, not so much. But the first maybe 10 years after it all went down, I would have people reach out to me every year coming up to IHC. Is the IHC guru coming back out? And I actually at one point had the Twitter handle IHC report or IHC guru. I don't even remember. And I was thinking about tweeting from, but it's one of those things that in order for it to be good satire, you have to have a nugget of truth in it.
Yes.
And once you get so far removed from it, you lose that. Because you just don't know who the major players are. You don't know what the issues are that people are dealing with anymore. And also at that point, I would say, just because of what had happened there with this situation and some of the stuff that had transpired while we were at GBS, not so much to me, but more so to my wife, I really had a lot of bitterness towards the CHM for a really, really long time.
Sure.
Because my wife is somebody who is very, very conscientious. In fact, I used to jokingly say that she had enough conscience for the both of us. When I went to GBS, and I make no bones about this, when I went to GBS, I actually graduated for my final year of high school, and then I crammed 4 years into 5. So that's how studious I was.
My guess is the same thing.
But when I went to GBS, my goal was to figure out what the rules are, and then to break as many of them as I could without getting caught. And I was good at it.
I love
it. And it's not that I was going out and getting high and getting trashed on the weekends and having all kinds of promiscuous, it wasn't anything like that. It was just breaking the stupid institutional rules. Like, oh, you can't go to a ball game? Oh yeah. Okay. I'll show you how I can go to a ball game and not get caught.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't go to the movies? Yeah, I know how to go to the movies. I can do that and not get caught.
That reminds me of us at Clinton Camp. We essentially would just the stupid rules. Yeah. We never wanted to do anything bad as far as, well, you might have, but it's just, just a matter of, okay, you got this dumb rule. We'll do something. We'll pull a prank, whatever. I understand exactly what you're saying.
and so that's, I like to say I was a rebel without a clue. But there did come a point where one day I woke up and I was kind of like, Brian, nobody made you sign that honor note. However dumb you might think that honor note is, nobody put a gun to your head and forced you to sign that honor note. And a man is only as good as his word. And if you said you're going to abide by these stupid rules, then you really ought to do your best to abide by these stupid rules. And so it's not to say that I was perfect. I found plenty of loopholes, exploited every one that I could. But I really did have a much different approach to things. But Bonnie, being very, very conscientious, and the mind games and just the emotional manipulation that goes on in the holiness movement, to a certain extent, and I think all of us that grew up in the CHM will be emotionally, spiritually, mentally scarred.
Yes, I agree.
Because of some of the nonsense that we saw. And Bonnie she grew up in the CHM. Her parents, to a certain extent, weren't as plugged in and weren't as rigid with regards to certain things. So, for example, she was allowed to go to her prom. Which was unheard of in the holiness movement.
Lucky.
She went in a dress that maybe didn't meet the conservative holiness movement standards. My father-in-law, he wore short sleeves. And in fact, there was one dear saint from the church who was always giving him a hard time about wearing short sleeves. And my father was like, I'm a farmer. I'm going to wear short sleeves. It's dumb to be out in the middle of the summer. And not just to mention that it's dangerous. Be around a PTO shaft with long sleeves.
Yep.
Come on. Use your brain. But he found out this dear saint was coming over one afternoon. And so he went and put on his wife beater and went out and mowed the lawn with those sleeves.
Oh man.
I like that.
So that's that's kind of how Bonnie grew up. She had some pastors' wives along the way that were interesting characters. But when she came to GBS, that was really her first exposure to the CHM on steroids. And and it really did throw her for a loop. Spiritually, emotionally. And so really for a long time after we left GBS, she really was unpacking all of that nonsense. And really to this day, and I think maybe more so than I do, she'll always struggle with the concept of grace. That she could ever be good enough in the eyes of God. And that just breaks my heart to think about that.
Me and Miss were just talking about this the other day, or yesterday, I think, just how the CHM does not understand grace at all. Not one bit. And just how, and they paint it as you make one mistake and God might punish you for years or something like that, or just this, it's a terrible picture they paint of God. It really is.
And yet the interesting thing is, to me, and we're going to go way off script here, but I think it's germane to the topic here, is how they will extend grace to. Now, I'm not going to say to people that don't deserve it, because we all deserve grace, but they will make excuses. And Jim Plank did it. I'm going to call him right out in this latest clip where he just kind of glossed over, these preachers diddling little kids. And it's kind of like wink, wink, nod, nod. But don't you dare wear short sleeves or have a television.
Yeah.
So they'll extend grace in that area, but then they won't extend grace in the area of short sleeves or,
If I'm not mistaken, he called the kid touching, he called it a moral failure? Something like a moral failure. Was what that was. And glossed right over that, just like, oh yeah, that's off a moral failure. And then went right back to, but your short sleeves and all. It's like, Jim.
But it took him about 30 seconds to stammer out that it was a moral failure. He would not call it for what it is.
Sin.
And,
yes.
And again, sin is sin. And all of us are guilty of falling, we've all fallen short of the glory of God.
Yes,
so I'm not sitting here trying to cast stones, but my point is, that they will extend grace in those areas, and in areas where they should hold people to account. That they kind of turn a blind eye, and I mean, there's another. I won't name names here, but there's someone that I know of that got kicked out of a particular Bible college for a moral failure, and a person that was sitting in the seat of judgment was involved with somebody else's wife. So, and I probably said too much there, because there are many people who probably are going to connect the dots. And I'm not trying to reopen old wounds, but the point is that they will extend grace to those kinds of situations, and yet they'll be so hard-nosed over meaningless, foolish stuff.
Absolutely.
And they will extend grace to certain individuals if you have the right last name. And if you don't have the right last name, then hit the road, Jack.
We've all seen that. It's like it's almost like the CHM does not believe in secondary issues. Everything is a main issue for it all. Like there's no, and that's why they can't disagree. Everything, the standards, all of it. Nope, this is all fundamentals of our faith. They can't distinguish.
Except that sometimes the main issues become secondary issues, like diddling little kids.
Yes,
that should be a main issue.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
But it's like not. I don't get it.
I don't either. I've sat and scratched my head many times over this. The CHM's reluctance to address that problem, to even make a statement, just get up and be like, "Hey, we understand this is an issue. We're working to fix it." You know what I mean? Just even something like that, something to just placate people. You don't even see that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You all left the CHM then over time and
and I'm going to kind of go back in time a little bit to kind of, because this is one of those things that as I've thought about how we left the CHM, it's one of those things where I think my exit out of the CHM happened long before any of this did. And to give you a little bit of my backstory, my mom and dad got saved when I was 5. So I remember the before Christ. I remember my mom and dad having just horrible fights. And one day my dad, going down the porch of our house and executing the most beautiful, Jackie Chan roundhouse kick as he kicked out a window.
Oh my God.
So, and not that my dad was ever violent to my mom. He never was. I'm not saying that at all. But
that window shook in fear every time he went past it. Oh man.
So my mom and dad got, and this is a reason why I will never be able to fully hate on the CHM, because I saw the change in my dad, and if it wouldn't have been for the CHM, I don't know as I would have ever seen that change in my dad. And so for that, I'm very, very grateful.
Yes.
But my dad eventually became a pastor in Western Pennsylvania. And we really grew up from the time I was about 5 till I was 13 when they became missionaries, very much in the CHM microcosm. It was, we went to church. We went to every revival. We went to every camp meeting within driving distance. If there was a youth rally, we were there. Mm-hmm. If there was everything that you can think of. To say that I grew up in church is not an understatement whatsoever. And this is before my dad became a pastor. It was, but it was only the CHM. We didn't go anywhere else.
Sure.
West, anybody outside the CHM, they were lost. Heretics. The Wesleyans and the Nazarenes, they might skid into heaven, but you never know. That ring might keep them out. That bobbed hair, that might get them. Those pants, those slacks, pedal pushers.
I felt the same way.
I love my pants. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, quite well. My dad eventually moved out to Pennsylvania, and he actually pastored 2 churches at the same time.
Wow.
About 6 miles from or I guess about 13 miles from each other. And I literally went to church at least 7 times a week. My
Lord.
dad would preach. Oh, yes. My dad would preach at least 4 times and sometimes 5 times on a Sunday. And then we would have, so he would preach at the one church in Geneva, while my mom and us boys went to Sunday school at the church in Linesville. And then my dad would leave the church in Geneva, and he would come to Linesville to preach while they had Sunday school in Geneva. And so he would preach twice on Sunday mornings. A lot of times we would have a nursing home service on Sunday afternoons. And then my dad would preach twice on Sunday evenings. And we would go to both church services. So one would start at 6, maybe go 6 to 7, and the other one go from 7:30 to 8:30. And then twice on Wednesday nights.
Why didn't they join them together for one service? Well,
that was one of the things that goes back to 18 being the perfect number.
Can't have mega churches.
So in essence, it really was family that went to both churches. It was like aunts and uncles that went to one and nieces and nephews that went to the other and kind of a thing. But my dad had suggested that they merge the churches in a town called Conneaut Lake, which is almost dead center between the two. And no way we could ever do that. So the church in Geneva has since closed. The church in Linesville, I think, is still open. But it was very much one of those kinds of situations. So at the same time, my dad was going to AWC to finish his ministerial education.
So
And
he's
it's one of
doing.
those things.
He's going to college while doing all that.
Oh yeah, and worked a part-time job too for a cabinet maker.
Good Lord, this man's
wow.
Superman.
I honestly don't know how my dad did it. And I also know this, and this is something I didn't find out until like the last couple of years. There were times when the treasurer would come to my dad and say, Reverend Wells, we don't have time. We don't have enough money in the treasury to pay you this week. And it wasn't that they were going to make it up.
Mm-mm.
My dad just didn't get paid.
He was just going to miss. Wow.
He just went without.
Happened to my
Man.
dad.
Did it really?
And
Yes.
That's dedication.
as
man.
kids, we never knew that. We never knew that. We knew we were poor in Job's turkey, but we did not ever know that kind of stuff was going on. You talk about my mom and dad being very, very wise and shielding it, because that, boy, talk about something that can make you bitter.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I don't want to get bogged down too much here. The point being is that in that area, there's a bunch of Allegheny Westland churches. And so we went to every Allegheny Westland revival. We went to every Allegheny Westland, like they had indoor camp meeting. They had Stoneboro camp. And
That's Allegheny Mecca.
oh my goodness.
Stoneboro. Yes.
Oh, I tell you, I can tell you stories about people there running in the spirit, and then they fall down and rip their jeans out, or not jeans, their dress pants out.
Oh,
and then they get up and they tearfully apologize because they hadn't been running in the spirit. That's the only way they could have fallen down, and ripped their thing, because they were running. They weren't running in the spirit.
Oh,
I've heard,
the only explanation.
I have heard that.
that's a new one for me.
Never heard that.
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mm.
So, that was the environment that I grew up in before my mom and dad went to Brazil. I mean, it was going to revivals and camp meetings and youth conventions, and that was our entertainment. That's what we did on Friday nights and Saturday nights. And if there was a revival anywhere within driving distance, they would lift service on a Sunday evening, and you'd go to the revival.
Yep.
And those were always the ones.
You didn't cancel service. You lifted service.
You lifted service.
Yes.
And those services were always the worst, because those were the ones where you got the hellfire and damnation, the great white throne judgment. Like, that's where they scared you. You're going to leave here and get hit by a bus, and like all of those stories, you got those the last night of a camp meeting, the last night of a revival service. And
what was Judy Williams' "How Far Is Hell" story? 3 miles down the road, whatever. I'm sure everybody's.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And once they saw the other car, they crashed.
Absolutely, exactly 3 miles down. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Exactly 3 miles from the church.
That story used to scare me to death.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff that as a kid you grow up, and it's just like, it freaks you out, and it scares you into a relationship with God, and then you're always kind of eternal insecurity, is always how I looked at it, because it's like, I woke up this morning and I must have lost my salvation. But then there was also, and I don't know where I picked this up at, but there was also, like, in the back of my mind, like, well, you can't get right with God until you can go to the altar, and and not every church service had an altar call.
Yeah.
So you would have to wait till the next altar call. So then it was kind of like, well, let me get all that sin in, because I know I gotta get that next altar call. So I gotta get all that sin in. And it's such a twisted way to look at it.
Yes, it is.
But that was again, and I will also say this in defense of my mom and dad. My mom and dad never preached that or taught that. My mom and dad were always very, very open with us. If I asked questions with regards, for example, to standards, and I would say to my mom and dad, well, why do we do this, or why don't we do this? There were times, and my mom in particular, she would say to me, Brian, we don't necessarily see it that way, but out of respect to the church that we've chosen to be a part of, we do X, Y, or Z, or we don't do X, Y, or Z. And as a kid, I could always accept that. Don't try and bullcrap me.
Yes.
But to come at it from that perspective, as a kid, I always understood that almost every organization has their own rules that you have to go by if you want to be a part of that organization. Some of them have a dress code to be a part of that organization. And so to come at it from that perspective, I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. but then you would hear that nonsense preached from the platform.
Yes.
And that's where it was kind of like, okay, a little bit confusing.
My story was very similar. Yep.
The sermons on little girls wearing bloomers. That was a great story.
Oh, I bet that. I think I missed that one. It doesn't surprise me, but yeah.
Well, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here because this is a great story, or at least I think it is. So Millard Downing was, God rest his soul, was preaching at Victory Grove Camp and was talking about how girls should wear bloomers underneath their skirts because if they slide into second base, they would show off the goods. And I have never wanted to be a second baseman more than I wanted to be after that sermon.
Yes.
So if we're ever playing softball and I want to play second base, no, I'm just kidding.
Talking about America's pastime here.
Fulfill his dream.
Gee whiz.
Second base!
He called it. He's running.
Take second, I'll take third.
He also was the one that was preaching a sermon on high heel. Women shouldn't wear high-heeled shoes because it makes their butts wiggle. And he turned around and he started with
How do you think I got my husband?
I love it.
That's how I got my
I love big butts and I cannot lie.
Yes. They're mixed a lot. My fave.
Dude.
You guys did see I like Big Bibles and I cannot lie, the remix of that.
What is it?
I love Big Bibles and I cannot lie.
Yes.
No.
I don't know if I've seen that or not.
Yes. You got to look that up. That's
Was this at
great.
IHC? Did they sing it at IHC?
No. But they wouldn't know who Sir Mix-a-Lot is. So
yeah, true.
Be able to do that. But, yeah, definitely look that up. That's definitely worth a listen.
I will.
But anyhow, so he turns around and he's kind of like acting, and he turns his backside to the congregation and like wiggles his butt as if he's like walking in high heels. And the funny thing about it is there's a dear old saint that went up to him after the church service and said, "Brother Downing, that was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and you should be ashamed of yourself." And he actually apologized to her. And in his defense, he actually apologized and said, "I am so sorry. I did not mean to offend you."
Really?
And so, my estimation of him went up a little bit in that he was willing to have that level of humility.
Sure.
To say, I am sorry that I would have offended you.
That lady was enjoying the sermon a little too much. Sounds like,
yeah. Anyhow, I've gone like way off the rails here. I'm trying to tell the story of how we got out of this whole nonsense. So my mom and dad became missionaries when I was 13. We went to Brazil. And when you go to another country, all of a sudden you realize there isn't a KJV Bible in Portuguese. And so all of this KJV only nonsense that had kind of been bandied about, like kind of all of a sudden starts falling like flat. Like, wait a minute, there's no K. And then you start realizing that how people dress and how people act in a different culture doesn't necessarily line up with the standards of the holiness movement. And then you start interacting with other missionaries that are like Baptist or Pentecostal or Catholic, and shout out to the Catholics.
Glenn, that's for you.
Glenn, love you, man. And all of a sudden you start realizing, like, wait a minute, these people that I've been told were heretics and that were headed to hell actually love Jesus. When you see that, you can't unsee it.
Absolutely right. You
cannot unsee it. And so for me, that really was, I think, the beginning of the end. It just took a long time for me to get there because eventually I came back. I went to GBS, and of course, I'm right back into the fiery furnaces of the CHM.
Yes.
And then we went to the Cayman Islands. And the Cayman Islands, it was kind of weird because it was kind of like the holiness movement, but not the holiness movement. It was kind of like this really, really weird place to be. But it kind of helped distance us a little bit from the CHM. And then in 2008, when we moved back to upstate New York, beautiful upstate New York, there there isn't a conservative holiness movement church within less than an hour's drive from where I live.
Yeah.
And the thing that Bonnie and I had made up our minds is that we weren't going to be, people that commuted to a church an hour away. We wanted to be a part of a church in our community where we could have impact in our community and influence with our neighbors.
Yes.
And so we ended up going for about 8 years to a Free Methodist church that was about a half hour away from us over in the city of Saratoga Springs.
Free Methodist used to be CHM, right?
Kind of, yeah. They were, and I don't remember all of the forks and the twists and the turns, but back in the day when my mom was growing up, the Pilgrim Holiness Church had a good relationship with the Free Methodist Church.
Okay.
And my mom's, I think her mom, and she's got some family that grew up in the Free Methodist Church. In fact, my grandmother graduated from Roberts Wesleyan High School at the time, which is the Free Methodist school over in the Rochester area. So we went to the Free Methodist Church about a half hour away from us. And about 8 years ago, our son was getting ready to go into junior high, and we looked around the church that we were going to, and there really weren't any young people his age. And Bonnie and I were very, very concerned about that. And we also really were feeling like our desire to have impact and influence in our community really wasn't working out, because in the entire 8 years that we went to that church, we randomly ran into people from our church 2 times in a store. That was it. That's how disconnected we were from people, because people were coming from a half hour the other side of the church to come to that church. We're coming from a half hour this way. So it's like our paths never crossed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we started looking for a church in our local area, and we found a Presbyterian church about 10 miles north of us. And so let's give it a whirl and see what it's like. And from the moment that we walked into that church, we felt loved, we felt valued, we felt shepherded, and we were just embraced as a part of the community. And now, I run into people from our church every day because I work with people from our church. I run into people from our church at the grocery store. I run into people from our church. Tonight, I went to get shavings at the Tractor Supply, and my wife had to be thinking, like, what in the world? The Tractor Supply is 2 miles away. Why did it take an hour to do that?
Sounds like my trips to Tractor Supply.
I ran into a guy from church.
Yeah.
And he and I were like talking about cows and goats and raising turkeys and, this, that, and the other thing. And so being a part of a community like that really was key. But really what also became huge for us is that our son got connected with Young Life. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Young Life at all, but
I've heard of it. I never was really involved with it, but familiar with the name.
It's an awesome program that's really focused more on reaching unchurched kids and just presenting the gospel to them. But Brian J. got involved with that, and through that, he established his own relationship with Christ. And I'm
ashamed to say, Brian, I think we had one of those at my high school. We had a chapter, and this sounds awful. If I remember correctly, I was CHM, and I looked at him, side eye, like, oh, you guys are quote Christians, huh? Which is terrible to say, but that's how I was.
I'm going to be right there with you, man, because I had never heard of it. The first time I heard of Young Life was when I was working for one of the internet service providers when I was still at GBS. And there was a guy that I work with who was a Young Life leader. And I did the exact same thing as you. I looked down my nose at him and I thought, there's no way. He's just teaching them a false gospel. He's just teaching them an easy way.
Yep.
And those kinds of things make me cringe.
Oh,
those kinds of things.
So bad. Sometimes the shame that comes over me, even though I know that God's forgiven me of that, and I try my best going forward. Sometimes just that past tense shame. My Lord, it'll hit you hard.
It does. And but Brian J. going to Young Life. In fact, he's now over at Gordon College, just north of Boston, freshman. We were over there a couple of weeks ago for Parent Day. And he said to Bonnie and I, he said, Mom and Dad, thank you so much for going to a church that had Young Life so that I could come to know Jesus.
No, that's what it's about. That's fantastic.
That really, made it, not to say that it wasn't worth it, but you know what I'm saying? It's
yes.
like it just really confirmed to Bonnie and I what we already knew, but that we're where God wanted us to be. And through this Presbyterian church that we're a part of, God has been able to speak into our son's life and into our lives as well, and has really helped us deal and process through a lot of that baggage that we've dealt with. And it's one of those things too, as we've kind of made these steps. So going from from GBS to the Cayman Islands, which was the Wesleyan Holiness Church, and then going from there to the Free Methodist Church, and then on to the Presbyterian Church. Along the way, God has just put in our lives the right people to help us process so many things. And in particular, at the Free Methodist Church, our pastor grew up in the old time Free Methodist Church when it was more like the conservative holiness movement, and he was really instrumental in helping us process through a lot of things, and his wife as well, Sharon. Were really instrumental in helping us process through so much of that, for lack of a better term, trauma that we had dealt with growing up with that kind of twisted theology.
I notice it takes time to process, man. And there's times now, sometimes it seems like I have more to process, or that I realize I have more to process. The older I get, I'll just notice something, and be like, all right, there's a root here somewhere. It was something to do with the CHM, has to be affecting this, or it takes so much time.
Well, and the funny thing is too, like I thought I had processed all that stuff and like kind of left it all in the past. And then I discovered this thing called the Hillbilly broadcast. And then all of a sudden it was like a Band-Aid was ripped off of a wound that I had kind of been ignoring. And it's been good because it's really caused me to think through and process some of those things that probably I had just kind of pushed to the back of my mind.
I'm not joking when I say this. I think this podcast has done the same thing for me, just because the CHM has been forefront in my mind for how long, Ken? 2 years? Going on 3 years here soon?
Yeah, going on 3.
And a decent chunk of that was hitting the CHM. And it's kind of brought it back to me as well. And there's been some times, I'm not going to lie, it can even get you down a little bit. You start thinking about it, you're like, oh my gosh. And then you start thinking about the casualties of it. That's what bothers me so bad, is the people that are sitting in that church pew that think what Jim Plank just said is the truth. That's what really bothers me. I have family members that are like this. It's either this way or I'm going to burn in hell. That's my only options.
Yeah, and that's the same for me. I still have a few like extended family, a few aunts and uncles, cousins and whatnot that are connected. But my mom and dad have left. Both of my brothers have left. So, my brother-in-law Al is left. So really the only people that are still close to us that are anyways connected would be my mother-in-law and father-in-law. And to say that they're really connected, I don't know. They attend a conservative holiness movement church sometimes on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And part of what it is my mother-in-law has some physical problems, and so sometimes they just can't get to church. And then usually I think they watch Hope Sound. God bless them.
Good boy.
Well, one of the other things too that we had talked a little bit about that video going around about with the kids at the one camp meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I am so thankful for is that my son has no frame of reference with regards to stuff like that. We've been able to shield him from that, and in fact, I think it was about 2 years ago. He went to a CHM service for the first time since I think he was like 2, and he came back. He was like totally just flabbergasted. It was almost like traumatic to him.
Yeah.
And the first thing he said is, Dad, he said, when they prayed, like they were all screaming at God. Don't they know that God can hear them? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I used to think that was normal. Okay, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And then, with regards to the sermon, the preacher got up, read a passage of scripture, and that was the last time he ever referenced it. It was just like he just rambled off on all the stuff. And he said, Dad, he never came back to the Bible. He never mentioned another verse of scripture. There was like, it wasn't even like he badly proof texted anything. It was just this diarrhea of the mouth that went on, and him just, nonsense stuff. And then my son got to see his first altar call of his life.
How many rounds of Just As I Am was it?
I don't remember. But
we can put some bet
he
nods
came
on
away. Yeah, he came away mad, like literally mad. And he said because he saw a little girl, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old, going forward crying, and he said, Dad, that was child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a 16, 17-year-old kid who looks at this and just calls it for what it is.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I had an instance told to me one time. The lady that told me it, she's the one it happened to. She said she went down to an altar call. And that whole thing, I used to be terrified of this. I would be afraid, especially when I was seeking the elusive second work.
Right.
That I would go down there and I wouldn't be able to get it. And then I would just it'd drag out and get real awkward and all that. And apparently she was having one of those moments. And then the preacher, in front of the entire crowd, and this was a very large CHM church, begins doing that whole praying thing where he's not as much talking to God as he is talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And now, dear Lord, you see her here and she's got a problem. And Lord, I help her to just give it all up.
Yes.
Help her, Lord, to just let go of that rebellion. That's, just whatever. Just go on in front of all these people.
Yeah.
She's basically just getting berated through prayer, which is an interesting tactic. It's emotionally manipulative. And I'm not a fan of altar calls these days.
Well, when I was at GBS, I remember there was one of those situations where, the fires of revival were sweeping the campus. And so all of a sudden, the next thing I know, they've got a garbage pail up on the altar for people to start bringing their worldly CDs and their short sleeve shirts and their posters and
TVs.
All that
That's
stuff. We would shoot those and have a bonfire.
Yes.
We were holier than that.
I'm guessing the worldly CDs were like Phillips, Craig, and Dean or something like that.
We did a double whammy. It was shoot them, then burn them. Make sure they were doubly dead.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
But all these people are going forward, and they're dumping all this stuff in this trash can. And there's one particular individual who they were. And I want to be careful. I don't want to make fun. If somebody is struggling with their viewing habits, and this is back in the days when you had to go to Blockbuster Video and rent a movie.
Mm-hmm.
But old school. Now I'm showing you how old I am here.
I don't think I've ever been to one.
Yeah. So
Friday night tradition.
He took his Blockbuster Video card and cut it up. Big deal. And of course, everybody said, woo, give it to God. Hallelujah.
Yep.
Well, there was another individual who had some issues, had been let go from school, was, in my opinion, maybe trying to get back into the good graces of the administration. And I mean, he couldn't get his wallet out of his back pocket fast enough as he's springing up front to get rid of his Blockbuster video card. And of course, I'm a cynic by nature, and I'm thinking, this is really like so stupid, because anybody who knows anything about Blockbuster, you just go down and say, "Hey, I lost my card. Can you give me another one?" I mean, It's not like cutting up the card does anything. It's like, go get another one.
Ken and I'm having this vision of like Dwight Schrute and Andy when they're trying to one up.
They're one-upping each other.
But the other piece to me as well is I'm looking at that and I'm saying, I wonder where they're going to dump all of that stuff. Because in 3 weeks, I'll be able to sell it back to them.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes, it's true.
It's just, So, that kind of stuff, you grow up around it. And then it's kind of funny when you see it. I'm going to say funny, but also disturbing when you see it through your kid's eyes, who has never been around it. And he calls it for what it is. And then you see videos like that one of that camp meeting. It's like, not only does it make you cringe, but it literally makes you sick to your stomach to think, man, there was a point in time where not only did I think that was normal, but I encouraged it, and I might have even participated in it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And that leaves you kind of feeling a little red-faced. At least me.
It sure does. I get that feeling different times. Like, man, I bought I think me and Mom talked about it the other day. Well, we bought a bill of goods for a long time, and bought all the way in. Brian, I don't want to keep you for forever. I've very much enjoyed the story. By the way, do you still have the logo for IHC Report?
I don't. All of that stuff has been lost to the ether.
Because I'm thinking we need some T-shirts with IHC Report on. So we need something. We need to resurrect this a little bit here.
Let me tell you something. It's not hard to do. Just go look at how the Drudge Report logo is.
I'm familiar with it.
And then just do it like just change it to IHC Report. It's what is it, like a shadow gray with a shadow black or something underneath it?
In all caps
with a shadow gray. Yeah, that's all it is. It was not Arial font. I mean, it was not anything brilliant. I mean, at the end of the day, I did it. There's no way it could be brilliant. And I am not an artist at all. I can't draw a stick figure. One time, I'm way off on a tangent here. One time I was playing Pictionary, and the word that I had to draw was bikini. They couldn't guess what it was. It was like watermelons.
Yeah, got some melons, right?
It was not good. Somebody thought it was a diaper on a stick figure. I mean, it was an artist. I am not. So,
great.
Before we go, we referenced how that there are people in the CHM that hear this BS and they think that it's like they have no way out. What would you say to, just for example, somebody that was sitting listening to Jim Plank the other day, and it's perfectly reasonable to assume that somebody's sitting there having an inner struggle anyways, because I think we all kind of come to that at some point. What would you say to somebody like that?
Boy, that's so hard, because when you leave the CHM, and you all are a little bit closer, I think, to it than I am. I mean, I'm 20 some odd years out of it. But when you leave the CHM, it's not just that you're leaving your theological framework, but you're leaving your social framework. You're leaving, and many times it's family that you're leaving behind. You're leaving behind your entertainment. I mean, as I said, growing up for us, going to revivals and camp meetings and stuff like that, that was our entertainment. Watching people run the aisles, that was like being at a baseball game. And so it's really, really difficult to step away from all of that, because it affects your life really in such a big way. But I would also say that God's word, how do I put this? Because I don't want to sound preachy, and I don't want to sound CHM-y here. But I believe that God's word stands up to tough questions. And if people aren't willing to let you ask tough questions, then you really need to question that.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
because God's word is going to be able to handle anything like that. And so, it's tough because everybody's journey out is so different. But I would also say, go try a different church. Just for once.
Yep.
Just go try a different church.
Mm-hmm.
Spend a Sunday morning at a different church. Or maybe 2 or 3 different churches, and just see what else is out there. Certainly not every church is created the same. Of that, there's certain churches I would recommend, and there's certain churches where I wouldn't recommend them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big old rainbow flag in the front of it. Probably stay away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good rule of thumb. Yes.
But I really, really do believe, and the other piece to it as well is get to know somebody who maybe isn't from your brand of Christianity. For us, that was such a huge thing. And when I'm saying get to know them, go into it like put your like desire to get a spiritual scalp. Put that on the back burner. Like you're not there to convert them. You're there to befriend them. You're there to learn their story, get to know them. And my guess is as you start talking and interacting with those people, you're going to find out that they love Jesus. And if you find out that they love Jesus, then all of a sudden, a lot of the stuff that you've been taught as you've been growing up really starts not making any sense. Because like, how in the world can this work? This person who wears short sleeves loves Jesus? How does that work? This lady that wears pants and has bobbed hair, she loves Jesus? How does that work? And I think once you start going down that road and you see it, you can't unsee it. You cannot unsee it. But you have to be willing to take a look at it.
Yes.
And if you're coming out from the standpoint that the conservative holiness movement is the way, the truth, and the life, then stay at the conservative holiness movement and don't go wrecking anybody else.
Absolutely. Very well put, Brian. Before we go, I want to plug the podcast, which I guess we just learned about before we started the show.
Yeah.
I think I thought he told me about this before. I probably just forgot.
You didn't tell me.
The Homestead Journey. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a podcast about the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. And really the fact that homesteading, in my opinion, is a journey towards those things. So it's really learning how to be, developing skills to be able to produce stuff so that you can live. And I think for all of us, that looks a little different. But I think all of us can do a little bit more in that regard, whether it's gardening, raising chickens, all of those kinds of things. I covered all 171 episodes, just finished season 4 this past weekend. Actually, this past year, we did a series on empty nest homesteading because our one and only beloved child has left the nest. And now Bonnie and I are here trying to figure out what to do with each other. Wait a minute, I might have said that the wrong way.
That sounded wrong for a second. Being a married couple.
Yeah. And actually doing that series really helped us process that. And I think for you guys, maybe what I'm hearing from you is doing this podcast has really helped you guys process.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
With PHM.
Absolutely.
And those kinds of things. But anyhow, it's available on all of the podcast platforms. And if you want to check out my website, it's thehomesteadjourney.net. But that's really a bit of a train wreck. It's kind of like the IHC report.